The Holy Gospel, according to St. Luke, the 9th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. Now about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up the mountain to pray. And while he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. Then from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my Son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent, and in those days told no one of any of the things they had seen. The Gospel of our Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. In the Gospel writings, Jesus is known for sneaking off and praying. It's an important part of his life. Before or after big ministry events, he always takes intentional time with God. The Transfiguration that we celebrate in church today, this is Jesus' prayer time immediately before he walks toward Jerusalem, the place known for killing prophets. We know of some of these instances of Jesus off in the wilderness praying quite well, like when Jesus was tested in the desert. Now, he was alone there, but for this mountaintop experience that Jesus is going to have today, instead of being alone, he invites with him some others to come and share in this experience. As we know, Jesus invites Peter, John, and James up the mountain to pray with him. Jesus desires to be in community here on the mountain with the Father. On this literal mountain, they all share in a mountaintop experience. They get to hear the voice of God. They get to meet the greatest of prophets of old. They get to see Jesus transform in front of them, his clothes becoming a dazzling white. And what an experience it was. If you ever called anything a mountaintop experience, this would be it. It changed them all completely. How they saw the world, confirming for all of them that together they were on the right path. Jesus is the Messiah. There is to be absolutely no doubt of that. They heard it from the Father's own voice. Both Jesus' ministry is affirmed up on that mountain, and so are Jesus' followers affirmed in following him. Today, beyond just this time together in worship, I want you to think about the mountaintop experiences that God has shared with you in your life. Those times when the world and God's purposes for it are crystal clear. Those moments where the greatness of God is so evident that it brings a tear to your eye. That feeling in your heart that is almost heartbreaking, but in a really good way. For me, when I think about mountaintop experiences, a few come to mind. Strangely enough, like in our reading today, they all happened outdoors, outside in God's good creation in nature. When I was a child, and I know you've heard me talk about this before, I was on a week-long hike through part of the Appalachian Trail, which extends from Georgia to Maine. About halfway through the week of hiking, after a long morning of climbing uphill on a muddy trail with a backpack weighing probably 40 pounds, we finally stopped for lunch. To ensure our safety all morning long, we'd been staring at our feet and or the person in front of us. We didn't want to slip and fall. Truth be told, we were all pretty much in survival mode. Thirsty, hungry, a little bit grumpy. But then at lunchtime, we approached an opening in the woods. I learned that we were going to get to sit down and enjoy as many calories as we could put in our bodies, that we're burning them faster than we could digest them. We all smiled. Even before we reached the mountaintop, the joy of having a mountaintop experience was upon us all. We dropped our backpacks off our backs. They hit the ground with a hard thump, not too different from our behinds, which soon followed. We ferociously dug into the food, sharing, passing snacks back and forth, dipping 2 fingers right in the peanut butter container. I don't know who mentioned it first. Probably one of our guides, but we learned that we were stopping that day at a special place. It was Rocky Top. This was our view, this picture here, or something like it. Rocky Top, Tennessee, where so many people had visited. Actually, where many people, like the Osborne brothers, had written some very famous music. In unison, I think, we all finally looked up. And to our astonishment, we saw the very reason for the inspiration that others had had on their own mountaintop experiences up there. The Smoky Mountains could have gotten their name in this place, I thought. Witnessing for myself the smoke or fog, I guess, down in the valleys. The horizon seemed as far away as I have ever seen it before. Blue mountain after blue mountain, one after another, the smoke in between each. This is what artists are trying to express, I remember thinking. They'll never be as good as God. Together we were all blown away by the beauty. Together we shared a mountaintop experience that probably changed each of our lives a little bit. We shared a memory of witnessing God in action. We felt the presence of God sharing with us a sliver of the greatness that God has. You've experienced things like this, I know. Maybe at a sunset or sunrise, maybe at the beach, or maybe too on a mountain. There is something special there that makes you feel so little, but yet still loved so much. What was important that day, I think, like in our gospel reading today, is that none of us were alone. Because we were together, sharing the experience of God, we all gleaned so much more of the experience. We could see that it wasn't just something in a single person that was being influenced by the scenery, but that we were all together completely blown away at God's work, at God's handicraft in making something so grand. I'm serious when I tell you that I want you to think today about your own mountaintop experiences. They're important for our lives. They help to define who you are. They have made your experience in the world unique for you. Sure, for some of us, we have had literal mountaintop experiences, but so too, those experiences are probably most often not on literal mountaintops. Think today. When has an experience with God inspired you completely? When has the space between you and God completely disintegrated? Maybe it has been in church. Maybe it's been in a hospital bed. Maybe it happens whenever you go somewhere special to you, like your hometown. Personally, I like my time alone. I'm technically an introvert, though being a pastor, it might not seem that way to you. I enjoy being by myself. I enjoy praying by myself. But what I have come to learn is that, like in our gospel reading today, when it comes to the biggest moments in my life, those mountaintop experiences where my whole worldview changes, it's when I am in community. It's when I'm with other people sharing an experience. It just seems to mean so much more when we are together. It reminds me of one of my favorite Bible verses where Jesus says, "Where there are 2 or 3 gathered, I am there with you." There's something to that. I've learned in my own life and listening to other people tell their mountaintop stories that mountaintop experiences absolutely don't have to occur on a mountaintop. We can get just as close to God in the valley as up on the mountain. And I've even learned that those mountaintop experiences, they don't just have to be once in a while. They can often be repeated. Much more common in life than you might at first imagine. I experienced this for myself last summer, actually. I was up at my grandparents' house in Michigan. I was there to officiate my grandfather's funeral. I was upset, to tell you the truth. I felt like it was all just a little too much to handle. And so I stepped out on the back porch to watch the creek that flowed in the backyard. Sat down in an old squeaky lawn chair, you know the kind. You sit down real slow so that you don't fall right through. This was my view, this picture here. I sat there and realized that in this valley, I was having a mountaintop experience. I happened to be alone, but not really. As I looked out into the water, I saw myself as a child. Me and my brother catching crayfish, skipping rocks, jumping over the black mud on the edge of the creek to avoid the leeches. I remember rolling down the hill. What fun we had had. I knew that the next day I was going to dump some of my grandfather's ashes in the same creek. There was a peace there that doesn't exist in many places. Time stood still. Like all of eternity could be seen. God's view from up above, able to see everything in all of time and space all at once. Yes, I was alone, but not really. There were so many loved ones there. It was the people being together again somehow that made it what it was. That made it a mountaintop experience. I know that we all have our special places that we like to go in the world, where we experience God the most. And my point today is that I hope you don't keep them to yourselves. Sure, we might get worried that others may not appreciate the place or experience as much as we do. That they might not get the feeling we do there. And that they may taint the whole experience, right? But I don't believe that. Our fear and insecurity that we might have ought not to get in our ways of sharing those precious, deep, spiritual moments with each other. Now, I'll admit that may mean being a little vulnerable. But so too, what it might mean afterwards, after sharing such an amazing experience with somebody else, it might even get better. As with the story of Jesus inviting his closest friends to be with him, the best mountaintop experiences happen when we are together, when we are in community. I'd encourage you today, as you think about your own mountaintop experiences, the next time you think about bringing somebody with you to share it. You know, Faith shared that way too. Invite others to the places, maybe like church, where you experience the deep presence of God in your life. Pray for God to open the door to having the conversation, so that you can invite those that you already cherish to the places where the spiritual becomes tangible, where God is so evident that there is no doubt in your mind that God could only have created this place and this moment. Joni, I know I didn't okay this with you, and so I hope it's all right to share this story. For the longest time, Miss Joni here kept telling me about this ride that she would take not too far from her home. For her, it was a place we might refer to in the modern vernacular as magic. She told me about horses coming right up to her and her sister to say hello when they were out there one time. She told me about this mystical experience she had as she would very slowly drive the back roads and soak in all that was there, all that God had created. She could both see and feel that it was true, that it was all good, that it was all very good. Well, Joni one day invited me to go with her. We got in the car. She said, "Oh, I've got a surprise for you today." And she smiled that great big smile that we see here each week at church. The music was off. The windows were cracked. It was a hot day, and so the AC kept us just cool enough. But not too much. The hot air outside still touched our skin, and it felt good. I don't think I could drive you there today if I wanted. Joni knew where we were, but I was definitely lost. And I liked it. I trusted Joni. I believed her when she told me I was going to experience something special, and I was not disappointed. Now, I won't bore you with the details like I have with my previous experiences, but I'll share with you a picture I took that day. It might seem simple, but God was there. I saw God that day. It might not look like it to you, but you weren't there. Joni, you know what I mean because we experienced it together. And I thank you for taking me on a mountaintop ride, for trusting me and allowing me into your personal space, for helping me to see God in this normal world. I ask today all of you, as you think about your mountaintop experiences and their importance in your life, think too about who you can invite to share this experience with in the future. Because like Jesus, be like Jesus. Bring your friends along to see God. May you have the courage and strength to climb the mountain ahead, and when you get to the top, take in the view. And know that God has brought you there safe and sound. God is with you, always. And may you see it every day in those that you include in your life. Amen.